Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Kentucky Small Business Development Center's Wednesday webinar. I'm really glad you're here today. I'm Dave Etkin. I'm the director of the Louisville Center of the Kentucky Small Business Development Center Network. And as we allow our attendees to kind of join our event, I'm going to share some information about the Kentucky SBDC program. We're the only statewide nationally accredited program that provides entrepreneurial and business development services. The Kentucky SBDC plays a vital role in the Commonwealth's economic development by assisting entrepreneurs at every stage of their business life cycle. For almost 40 years, the Kentucky SBDC has assisted emerging and growing businesses by providing the professional expertise, tools, and information necessary to make sound business decisions in a complex and ever-changing marketplace. We do this at no cost to our clients, thanks to the U.S. Small Business Administration, who co-sponsors our program, which is then administered by the University of Kentucky, who partners with regional universities, colleges, and local economic development agencies. We're also part of a national network, America's SBDC, with over 1,000 centers across the nation. To learn more, visit KentuckySBDC.com, and there you'll find additional resources to help start, fund, and grow your business. And if you'd like to request personal assistance, email us at info@kybizhelp.com or call 1-888-475-7232. As always, a recording of today's presentation will be emailed to you later on this afternoon. And if you look to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little toolbar. If you don't see it, just kind of hover down there with your cursor and it'll pop up for you. And you'll see the chat feature. So if you have any questions or comments for us as we go through the program today, just put them in there. And we'll answer them, either during or towards the end of the presentation, whatever works best. And just to make sure that you can hear us and see us and everything is working well, just go ahead and post in the chat, say hello, and let me know where you're watching from so that I know you can see and hear us. I'm going to go ahead and put me in there. So say hello. I'm here in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm Dave Etkin again. I'm the director here of the Louisville Center. We're one of 17 centers across the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And so again, I'm glad you guys are here today. As we work with small businesses all over, one of the biggest things we hear is, I can't find good employees or good contractors or good help or good anybody to help me grow my business. And it's really affecting the way we have to do business and think about the future. So I wanted to bring on someone that really knows how to do this. And I'd like to introduce my great friend, Molley Ricketts. She is the founder and CEO of Incipio Workforce Solutions. She is an expert in workforce solutions and HR and employees, finding recruitment. So Molley, it's great to see you today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I know we were talking earlier and I mentioned what I just said, and you said you hear that all day long too. So that's what we're going to talk about today, right?
Yeah, so I thought, in fairness of where small to medium-sized businesses really sometimes fall short of, one of the key components of success to their business is hiring individuals to build their team with the right talent at the right time, with the right build. So one of the things that we like to do is, first and foremost, to help small to medium-sized companies understand the do's and don'ts of interviewing. So we keep it pretty simple. A lot of times individuals see or feel like HR or the Department of Recruitment and Help is a legal binding stopgap, right? Instead of viewing it as the parameters and boundaries that we need to set for those things. So what I've got prepared for us today is just keeping it legal with the basic do's and don'ts of interviewing. And if you're ready, I'm ready.
Okay. Again, if you guys have any questions or comments, just put them in the chat there. This is a great opportunity to really pick the brain of a super expert here. So take advantage of that.
Let's see, did that pop? Oh, share my screen. Let's try this way.
Yep.
Sorry about this.
That's okay.
Okay, how about
there
now?
We go. Awesome. Perfect.
Got it?
Got it. Looking good.
All right. So the do's and don'ts of interviewing. Keep in mind, again, like we've talked about, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to pop them up and we'll get to them straight away. So what we're going to accomplish today is just the basic do's and don'ts of interviewing and a few tips and tricks that we have with Incipio to help individuals make a better decision in their hiring plan. So the legal stuff, the basics and parameters of what you need to do to ensure that you have set boundaries for your organization, what to say and what not to say, how to do it, inclusion in today's world, and also let's get inquisitive. So from an EEOC, which is Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, anyone that has more than 15 employees falls within specific guidelines of what to do and what not to do when hired. So when you think about being responsible for these federal laws that your company can now fall into, what does that mean? What are the parameters? Who is responsible for making sure that my interviewing process, and I'm sure you're thinking, oh, great, on top of not being able to find top talent, there's a potential that I could get sued for not hiring the right way. Unfortunately, yes, but that's why we're here today, right? So what laws do apply? For what work situations? The hiring, firing, promotions, yes, that's included in that. When you think about the harassment, the training, the wages, the benefits, this is on top of everything else in consideration of starting your business. Understanding what those laws are and who they apply to is the basic fundamentals of keeping you and your organization safe from the potentials of what could happen. So if you are an employer that has at least 15 employees, you are covered and bound by EEOC laws. Once you get to 20 employees, there's an age discrimination. So each level has a different parameter of what it is that you need to follow for those legally binding opportunities and the do's and don'ts of interviewing. So I'm going to touch on a few of the highlights. These are one specific that cover from that age, from that employee count and beyond. So these two here are pretty big. It is illegal to discriminate someone on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, or sex. As you can see the specifics there within that law of 1964 and what is following behind it, those are where the parameters come in for the do's and don'ts of interviewing, which we're going to talk about a little bit more to protect you in this category specifically. Another big one is the Pregnancy Discrimination Act. It is illegal to discriminate against a woman because of pregnancy, childbirth, medical condition related to pregnancy or childbirth. These are the first two on the EEOC platform because that we like to mention, because these are the two most violated laws, meaning of all of the changes that have been happening and what is coming about from an interviewing perspective, an offer perspective, an employment perspective, these are the two greatest offenses that come into the courtroom. As far as the Equal Pay Act of 1963, this law makes it illegal to pay different wages to men and women if they perform equal work in the same workplace. Obviously, this is something that has come about within the last few years as a true point of contention as well, that are hitting the desks of many attorneys as women are bringing to light how they are not being paid equally to men, and understanding that the roles, if they are an equal to and same of different workspace, that's where the differences become part of the opportunities for what laws and court cases are being won. The Age Discrimination of Employment Act of 1967, this law protects people who are 40 or older from discrimination because of age. So, few variables here. Not only do we have the age discrimination for 40 and older, but also the things that go against and along with that individual. So let's say you have a female over the age of 40 that's pregnant. This could be a dual case. Does that make sense to everyone? not seeing any questions, so I'm going to continue. As far as the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, this makes it illegal to discriminate against a qualified person with a disability in a private sector in a state or local government. So when you think about the opportunities that come along with this, this is something that, again, continuing to follow a consistent and concise process that's developed for you and your organization, that's the parameter that you want to keep in place to ensure your boundaries are almost even checking the box for things that are happening with each candidate that come into your organization as a potential fill for opportunities that you have open. Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act of 2008. This is also known as GINA. This law makes it illegal to discriminate against employees or applicants because of genetic information. And again, all of these are specific categories of EEOC that are most popular that we see hit the court. Know your state. All of this is very Googleable. Kentucky has an Equal Employment Opportunities Act that prohibits hiring discrimination on the basics of physical disability and HIV status. This is something that's very specific to Kentucky. So there are federal laws, of course, but what we need to do within the state of Kentucky is follow those state and federal guidelines, which, as we know, can sometimes bump heads with each other. 73855. Any ideas on what this means? Any thoughts? What you don't say can mean so much. What does that mean? Why is it that what we say or what we do or our behavior or our physical language of what this means, and why is it so important in an interview? I'm sure we can all agree that we've been in an interviewing situation that you can talk about, let's say that you had a rushed morning and you go into an interview and it's 11:30 and what you thought you were preparing for at 8 a.m. has completely slipped your mind by the 11:30 interview, right? So when you think about how that works and what it is that happens, why is it so important? Well, you're the first person that this interviewing candidate is going to meet with, right? So understanding the how of what impression they are looking at making, why is it important to stick with the interview guide? That keeps you on task. And it's going to keep you from asking questions that could potentially weigh in on an outside point of view that could weigh your decision in the candidates that you're talking to. One of the greatest questions I think that especially in Louisville in the Kentuckiana area is what high school did you go to? Now, why is that a question that should or should not be asked? Any thoughts? When we think about the opportunities of what a candidate offers, first and foremost, knowledge, skills, and abilities are the essential functions of the job that you're interviewing the candidate for, right? You want to know if they can do the job. The part of it then becomes culture, environment, and reward structure. Are they going to be a good fit for your organization based on what it is that you know to be true that your culture is and what culture you're trying to develop? Keeping with a standardization of questioning during the interview process is needed to be consistent, to keep the same tone, and it's almost something that becomes so repetitive in us that it becomes a conversation instead of an interview. Does that make sense to everyone as to why gaining that comfort and confidence within that interviewing process, not only for you, but for the candidate is so important? So 73893. Any thoughts on what that means? I'm going to tell you. So 7% of our meaning is communicated through spoken word. So the way that this message is being delivered to you is both verbally and visually, right? 38% is communicated through tone. I think we can all agree that when we're having a conversation and going through that, and there are points of excitement in the words, and perhaps even the way that the information is being presented is through tone of voice. 55% of that is through body language. Crazy to think that all of this is in the interviewing process, and we haven't even gotten to the questions yet. 93% of communication is all nonverbal. And during an interview, that is the key. So when you think about what you want to do to ensure the best impression for these individuals that you're interviewing, the expression of your tone of voice. So if you're running in from another meeting and you're exhausted and you're gasping for air, what feeling do you think that that gives to the candidate? They're rushed. They're not really interested. This interview isn't a priority for them. My candidacy for the organization is not an important decision for them, even though it could be the biggest decision that you're going to make this week in adding to your team. But the way you are aware of how you go into this interview is so important to help the individual understand the importance of your culture and environment. So understanding this model of 7% is what is communicated through spoken word. So the way that you're asking the questions that you're asking. 38% is communicated through the tone of voice and through body language. So how you're asking those questions is very, very important. Keeping that in mind when you're going into an interview, even if you are running from another meeting, if you can take 30 seconds, take a deep breath, and then walk into the interview. Keep those things in mind when you're going through this. I know we're all busy. One of the things that I'm trying to do is change my mindset from using a different word or verbiage. So I like to say now that I'm in high demand and loving life. Doesn't that sound so much better than I am so busy? So actively listening and listening to what the candidate is not saying is just as important as how you're delivering the message for the interview. Now, what not to do. So we kind of threw one out there about the question of what high school did you go to? One of the biggest things that you want to make sure that you're not asking are questions that speak to anything outside of the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you have to know for this individual to perform this job. Every question is to be asked the same way to each candidate. So what you want to do is make sure that you have a list of questions set and standardized for each position that you have. So this doesn't mean that you can't ask different questions for a different position. It just means that you need to ask the same list of questions for each of those positions that you have open. Does that make sense? Interview guides for each position is very important. It's vital, actually. One of the things that we really stress for employers to keep in mind is this allows you as the interviewer to weigh the pros and cons of each candidate equally. Because if you're not so prepared for each of the interviews, you could have a completely different conversation in those processes than you would have otherwise. So let's say that for candidate number one, you come in, you've been on back-to-back meetings all morning, you come into the interview and you're and you have the conversation. Candidate number two comes in later in the afternoon, you've been able to grab some lunch, have some downtime, spend some time outside, getting some sun, really able to decompress from your morning. Don't you agree that if you don't have a standardized interviewing guide for this position, that interview for you is going to go completely different than the way that the one in the morning did? Making sure that you have the same questions for the same position to ask every candidate in the same way is critical to the success of finding the right fit for your position. And it keeps you legal. Sometimes candidates may overshare For example, my son was sick and running late. I hate that I was a few minutes late, but thank you for continuing to see me. What did that candidate tell you in that statement? What are the things that you need to write down from that statement in the interviewing process? None of it. One of the things to think about and consider to do when you're interviewing and someone volunteers information to you about their personal life that is not relevant to the success or the pieces of the job that they're going to do for you is physically put your pen down if you're still handwriting those notes. If it's something that you're doing electronically, remove your hands from the keyboard so that the candidate can see these things and understand that you have not notated any of this information. One thing to remember that sometimes people don't even think about, do not write on a resume. Do not write on an application. These are documents that are owned by the candidates that they have been given to you to ensure communication has been received and delivered about their knowledge, skills, and abilities and what it is that they're looking for in the position of which they've applied. I believe I see a question here. Let's see. Oh, nope, that's just an announcement. Hi, Steve. All right. As we're continuing on, when we think about things to avoid and what that looks like for organizations that you may not even consider at times. So what year did you graduate from high school or college? How old are your children? Have you ever been arrested? What sorority or fraternity did you join? It's continued to go on and on. One of the creative questions that I've heard in my past from a leader is, how do you spend your Sundays? So technically they weren't asking if they have a religious standpoint or if they attend church, but they were asking what their Sundays were like. Why are these things so critical to not ask during the course of an interview? Any guesses? Any thoughts on why? Unless this question specifically answers an opportunity for the job in which you're hiring for, it's not relevant. It's not relevant as to why this person is able to speak Portuguese unless that is a requirement to the position. Does that make sense to everyone? When we think about, I'm going to jump back here for just a second, just to make sure that we have touched on everything. One of the things that we have to make sure of is that every question we're asking does not, it is specific to the position that we're hiring for. So making sure that you have a job description that is relevant to the position that you're hiring to is critical. Base your interviewing questions off of that information, right? So for this position, is it illegal for someone to hire based on criminal record? Let's say you and your organization have decided to be a second chance employer. You have to make sure that the parameters and boundaries of what that means to you and your organization are set and firm so that everyone knows the standard operating procedures for what that looks like to be a second chance employer. If you have to ask in your interview, the minimum qualification is you have to be able to consistently lift 30 pounds without assistance. So when you ask that question in an interview, are you able to consistently lift 30 pounds over an 8 to 10 hour time frame, whatever that schedule is for? Yes, you can ask that question, and yes, you can notate the response because it's a specific guideline to the job. Does that make sense? Now, when you have an individual that comes in for an interview that may have a disability, visual or non-visual, asking the question, should be rephrased in some fashion to say, are you able to consistently lift 30 pounds or more consecutively and consistently over an 8-hour time frame? It's natural when you're going through the interview process, you want to get to know these folks, especially when you're a small to medium-sized company, right? They're coming into an organization sometimes, as small business owners, it's filled with family, it's filled with close friends, because that's where we were to be able to build our companies. This person could be coming in from the outside and completely change your culture. So wanting to know more about the family and the friends and education and things that may feel off limits, but it's truly for your protection. Understanding that this is a piece, you want to make sure that these individuals that are coming in, that you're interviewing for the position, it's truly about the knowledge, skills, and abilities of the role. Any questions?
Molley, here's a quick question. So, I hear a lot about hire for culture and train for skills. And how do you find a culture fit? How do you interview for that? Is this an appropriate time to ask that question, do you think?
Well, I do have a few questions that may be able to help with a interviewing guide, to help understand and define that individual's character and behavior for the cultural piece of what we're hiring to. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay, great. But great question. Absolutely. One of the things from an EEOC perspective that we have to be sure that we're managing is we hire to knowledge, skills, and abilities first, culture, environment, and reward structure second. If we are not doing that, we have to clearly define the why as to the reverse. For example, if you are a teaching organization, that could be the reason why. It's different. So thinking about questions to gather for information. Here's a list of a few questions that would be a value add for you to entertain during the course of the interview consistently with every interview. So these questions down here, David, I think go to what you were speaking to just a moment ago about culture. Questions that get to behavior. You want to ask probing questions that allow an individual to really tell their story from an experience perspective, not personal. So describe a time when you disagreed with your manager and how you accomplished something. Tell me about a stressful situation at work and how you handled it. Now, in these questions about behavior, rather than gathering general information, sometimes there are opportunities in which an individual may tell you a story that could volunteer information personal. And again, remember the trick or the tip about the putting down the pencil or removing your hands from the keyboard. It's just going to protect you. You want to ask behavioral-based questions so that you're going to be able to get more information from that individual, not only to understand the type of person that they are and how they solve problems in these examples here, but also based on their answers and their responses, is that the way that you and your organization would handle it? Two thoughts on that. One, if no, how is it going to be different than the way your culture and organization handles it today? Is that something that's acceptable in what you're looking for to build out your culture? And two, if it isn't, what is different? And should you be thinking and viewing things differently? It's all about the current guidelines that you have and seeing an opportunity to enhance your current jobs with the interview guides that are going against those jobs and the descriptions of them and how they work better together. Does that make sense? So situational questions and what it is for the interviews that are happening and how they're happening really help you understand the basis of it. So what we like to promote is really that 4-phase interview guide, just as we have here. So I'm going to skip back to this other page real quick, just so that we can have that for everyone to reiterate the 4-part interview guide. Questions that gather general information. So this is part 1. Doesn't mean that these go in this certain order. It's just to help you understand the value of breaking down the interview guide consistently and having these questions. Gathering information, questions about behavior, situational questions, and personality questions. Now, when you think about what is your greatest fear, is that relevant? What difference does that make? What's that going to tell me? Understanding the value of the job description that you have, the interview guide that you have questions based upon for that specific job, the consistency of how you're delivering these questions will allow you to take a breath and the candidate to understand that this is a conversation while it's an interview and you are taking notes. It's something that allows you to get to know this person, not only for their knowledge, skills, and abilities, but also based upon your environment and what it is that you're trying to build within your organization. Does that make sense to everyone? Does anyone have a favorite question that they like to ask during their interviews with their candidates? One of the oddest questions that I ever found when going through an interview myself was, do you consider yourself an apple or an orange? And what response I gave, what value of that would that be to hold for this position? So when you think about questions like, what's your greatest fear? It's really to engage and enlighten the conversation with a different a response or emotion through that interview. Does anyone have a question that they enjoy asking in the interview process, that they find a value to what it is that they are hiring for? Any of your favorite questions? Tell me a little bit about yourself from a professional standpoint. Let's see, what's another good one? Tell me about a time when you were able to solve a problem on your own and take that to your business leader, and that was a decision that they went with or not. Thanks, David, for putting that in the chat. While you guys are thinking through those favorite questions so that we can have discussion around those, I'm going to continue on, if that's okay. Inclusion in today's world. This is a very popular question about what is inclusion and why is it important? I think given the last 2 years of what we've all been through and the world today, thinking through how this input and what and why is it important is critical to the continued success of you and your organization. What do these things mean? What does LGBTQIA mean? And why is it important? The state for what you do hire for. Watch your words, they are very powerful. Thanks for putting your question in, Martha. Just to jump back for a moment, what makes you a good candidate for this job? Love that question. That really allows you to see a different side of individuals and gets that conversation to open up. One of the greatest questions that I love to hear from a candidate at the end of an interview is when you say, what questions do you have for me? Is when a candidate says, what makes you think after our conversation that I would not be a good fit for this job? Love that question from a candidate. Thanks, Martha. Why is it so important? Why is inclusion so important? When we think about the words that we use, 6% of the population identifies as LGBTQI. However, of that number, only 22% are out at work. So making sure that you are not excluding anyone is very important when we go through the process of welcoming and exhibiting a healthy culture for our folks. State what you do hire for. Clearly stating in an interview that what is most important to your company is that you're hiring for passion, talent, an appropriate skill set. That's the most important thing. So one can also state that their company is a company of inclusivity. Watch your words. They're very, very powerful. So here we have a few examples of things that could be said, the words that are being chosen that could truly offend. I think we could all agree that understanding the value of the individuality of individuals and what it is that we can bring to and for candidates that are going through our interviewing process for positions is key to the continued success, even if you don't hire that person. Can we all agree that the impression of what it is, even if you don't hire an individual, is just as powerful as those that we hire? I'm going to pause on that question and look to the question that's been brought up in the chat. What is the best way to answer when you are asked the question, what pay, let me move this over so I can make sure I'm getting all the words. What pay do you want, and do you give a range? This is a tricky question, and a lot of folks pull this out and say, I really don't want to tell you how much I want to make because, I don't want to limit myself. And then as an employer talking to a candidate, well, I don't really know what we're going to pay for this position. It depends on the individual that we find to fill it. Let me tell you what that does on both ends, both as the employer and the candidate. We all know what we need to make to maintain a work-life balance, specifically from a salary standpoint. Can we all agree on that? So if you tell me that this job is going to pay me $20 an hour, but I need $40 an hour, what's the likelihood that me as a candidate, I will be able to lose $20 an hour to gain this position, no matter how passionate I am about the opportunity? Very slim. So helping individuals, both candidates and employers, understand the value of putting parameters and minimum expectations of what it looks like from a salary perspective is additional key to success, but more importantly, respecting everyone's time. Because do you really not know what you're going to pay for this position? If you're a small business owner, Incipio is a small business. So I know exactly how much we're going to be able to invest in a new partner for the position, for the business. I know exactly what that number can be. I know that I can go a little low. I also know that I may be able to stretch it a little more if the candidate has more of the expectations to be met. Can we all agree on that? When you think about the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you need to fill this position and what that looks like, understanding the salary of the position, you have to know those things. It's a minimum expectation. So what I've done is left this time here for us to be able to talk and ask questions. Because I know one of the greatest opportunities, more often than not, is for organizations to say, well, I need to discover how to hire the right person for the job the first time. So I'll ask you this question before we get started. Is it more expensive to you and your company to have a bad hire or to have a position go unfilled without anyone in it? What costs more to your company? Anyone? Do you want to hire the right person for the right job the first time and retain them? Making sure that the right efforts on the front end of the hiring process could make all the difference in the world. When you think about a bad hire and the cost of that, understanding the value of the right fit for knowledge, skills, and abilities, culture, environment, and reward structure, questions to ask yourself for what that looks like and how. One of the greatest phrases that I've heard in my 25 years in the recruiting industry is hire slow, fire fast, which was great up until about 2 years ago, right? We could all choose the pace in which we were hiring someone. So understanding the value of what it is that your organization needs, having those minimum expectations up front allows you to hire faster than you used to. So of the cost to the business, a bad hire is very expensive, especially when you don't understand the level of toxicity that could be a ripple effect within your organization. Absolutely. But then looking at it on the other hand of when you think about having the position go unfilled, are you exhausting the person or persons that may be doing the responsibilities of that one role? From Angela here, we have we hire a lot of new grads into overnight positions. Most difficult question for them to answer is how they thought out how their new schedule works with their life. Oh, wow. So if I'm reading the question, the comment successfully, you're talking about you have new grads that are going to be working on a third shift schedule. Am I reading that right? And follow up the thought. Okay, great. So follow up the thought on whether they have friends and family with overnight experience. It's not for everyone. Yeah, that's difficult. I can see where that would be a challenge. So when you think about perhaps asking the question, in this environment, we are looking for third shift operators. Do you have a lot of turnover from that currently, Angela? Perhaps there's an opportunity that you can look at the interview guide and the individuals that are being hired. Sometimes folks, especially in that demographic of life when it comes to age, a second shift schedule works best for them, right? I think we can all agree that when we're in that phase of life, second shift worked best because of what you could do, right? First and third are the two primary schedules that are easiest to fill across every industry. Second shift is the most difficult. When people move out of days and then they transfer to days to fill the work, okay. So when you're thinking about the questions for this in typical form, I would take history of the success of the individuals that you've hired and just keeping track of that. Let me dive deeper. The individuals that have found success in that scheduled shift opportunity, do you know a little bit about their knowledge, skills, and abilities and their experience and the questions and how they answered them for the culture, environment, and reward structure questions of the interviews that you had? Is there a correlation between consistency and deliverable of that interview that you can pull the information out of the candidates to have consistent deliverables? Does that make sense what I'm saying? I'm going to go back to the question that we were building here. Okay. So how we develop the interview guides for the positions in which we're hiring. So if you can deliver consistent questions for candidates to answer, questions to gather general information, understanding the value of how those boundaries have been set, and consistent questioning for those interview guides. Does the foundation of understanding and building that consistent interview guide help understand how you can measure the difference between the two? Does that help? So some questions not to ask in the interview guide. Start thinking about those types of questions. So I'm going to jump back to, what is your favorite question to ask throughout the interview? We've had some great ones come in. But we talked about questions to ask and those responses that you have. So I'm going to go back through here and find some of those. What makes you a good candidate for this position? Love that question. Is that something that you ask to every candidate? I want to make sure that that's happening. When you think about the opportunities for what it is that you're gathering out of these interviews, there's a lot of conversation that has to happen for you to feel confident and comfortable with the hire, right? Can we agree? So when you take an hour of which you're going to get and receive the person to have all of this information, you're getting an hour of their time and you're seeing 110% of the best of them, right? You're never going to see this person better than the way that you see them right now. Let's say, rate the last job between 1 to 10, and what would make that a 10? So how would you rate your last job? A lot of the opportunity that have come about within interview guides is understanding the value of what this would mean to you, the interviewer, as a good fit for this position. So if you were able to rate your last job between 1 and 10, what relevance is that going to answer from you as the interviewer for this position to be a good fit? Can you think of the specifics for that question to be asked in every candidate? And what is it that you're trying to get out of it? The salary range question, I think we answered that, but I'll touch on it again. The importance of understanding the value of what that is to an individual can set the minimum standards for that conversation going forward, and to entrust the respective time. If you know you're not going to be able to pay more than $20 an hour for this position, don't bring someone in that's asking a minimum of 40, thinking that you're going to be able to convince them to come on board. Does that make sense? Or if you do, that needs to be a conversation that happens through the course of the interview. You know, maybe those individuals are in a position where they can do something like that. Their work-life balance priorities have changed. So absolutely, it's an opportunity to have the conversation, but the minimum expectation should be at least what it is that they're looking for to be paid and you are willing to pay. We have another question. What can you ask the interviewee's ex-employers on the background check? Legally, not much. Legally, you can ask the previous employer the dates of employment, and even questionable right now. There are a couple of situations that have been brought to attention of the pay, validation of pay from the previous employer. So even that's becoming a question. So the question of their dates of employment, their job title, the essential functions of the job. Questions that you're not able to ask a previous employer are that of, is this person eligible for rehire? When we're going through the previous employment from a reference check perspective, one of the things to consider in that is, well, why can't I ask the previous employer if they're eligible for rehire? Well, let's just say that there was a situation that happened that put that candidate at risk or in a situation where they didn't feel comfortable and they were terminated for the position. Now, we can all agree that sometimes there are situations that history repeats itself. I think we've all heard that one as well. But understanding the why behind the situation, is it relevant to what it is that they're going to be doing for you and your organization? So very limited as to what can be asked. And a lot of times, if you do receive more information than what has been asked, if that previous employer volunteers information to you as to why they are no longer there, is it relevant to the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are needed to perform this task? Does that make sense? Perfect. One of the greatest things that you can do to protect you and your organization is to outsource that. There are several organizations that it's all electronic, where they can make those calls at a minimum cost, and it keeps you protected because nobody wants a defamation of character suit on their hands. Great questions. What are some other questions that you guys have about the interviewing process? One of the things that I would like to propose that you ask yourself at the point in which you are opening a new position: what position am I hiring for? Right? Sometimes there are situations that we have put into place that we all can agree that that job description hasn't been rewritten in how long? Sometimes it was when the job was posted years ago or when the company first started. Is it still relevant to what it is that I need to add value to this team today? Another question to ask yourself: do I understand why I'm hiring for this position? Are you hiring for this position because it's a vacancy that someone left, or is it a new need? As small companies continue to grow, understanding the strategy for what to hire for, not to hire around. Let me explain. When you have an individual in front of you that you're going through the interview process, or let's say you meet them at a networking event, and the passion and drive and the opportunity for advancement that this person is looking for is exactly what you need within your organization. What knowledge, skills, and abilities did they bring to the team to add value for that growth? Who needs to be hired for the position that you have open? If they have the culture, environment, and reward structure fit for your company, and they have the smarts and the brilliance and wisdom to be able to transition to the need that you have and be innovative enough to fill and write that job description with you, game changer. But you still have to be able to understand the need that you have to fill that position and ask open questions during the interview to understand the value of what it is that that person can bring. So understanding the expectations of the job in order to ask the right questions. One of the greatest pieces of advice that I have for you is to get prepared for the interview in advance. Remember the example that I gave in the very beginning about how you looked through your day, you were getting ready for the interview, getting all of your thoughts together, reviewing the person's application and resume, going through the interview guide, making sure you were clear and concise with those questions for the candidate. And then all of a sudden the morning took over and you're now rushed to get to that 11:30 interview, gasping for breath as you're going in and saying, I apologize, I'm a couple minutes late. Let me get settled. Let me get my questions together. The presentation that gives the candidate and the mental situation that you have yourself in is not good. You know how we measure everything for candidates based on first impressions? They're doing the same for us. So let's say that this candidate in the situation that we're in right now, you were late, gasping for air, running through the morning with appointment after appointment after appointment. Not saying that these things aren't sometimes thrown at us as business leaders and small businesses that have to make those decisions. What I'm saying to you is, again, take a step back, take a breath, get prepared for the interview. Because the candidate that's on the other side that could be the rock star that we've been looking for, they're measuring us just as much as we're measuring them. So when you go and you have a meeting with someone and they're, sorry, I'm late, just so busy. I can't believe this slipped my mind. I apologize that I'm 5 minutes behind. I'm not fully prepared for this meeting. What does that tell you? What impression does that give? And this can be someone that you work with all the time. Understanding the value of the impression that we're also giving to the candidate is just as important as that of them giving it to us. So, questions to ask yourself when you're going through hiring and looking to fill a positions. What position exactly am I hiring for? Do I understand why I'm hiring for this position? Do I know who needs to be hired for this role? Do I know what interview questions to ask, and are they legal and consistent? Do I clearly understand the expectations of this job in order to ask the right questions for the position? And lastly, am I ready for this interview? Thinking about adding to the team can be so stressful for a small business because of the impact that it has to your bottom line. The value, if you have more than 15 employees, your business is subject to federal laws prohibiting discrimination in hiring. So you have to understand your boundaries and the box that you need to have for yourself set up to ensure that you're measuring everyone consistently across the board. So ask yourself this question. Will the answer to this question, if used in making a selection for this position, have an inequitable effect in screening out minorities or members of one sex? Think about that question. I'll say it again. Will the answer to this question from your interview guide, if used in making a selection, so the candidates that you're asking this position of, have an inequitable effect in screening out minorities or members of one sex? And always ask yourself this question when you're going through and developing your job description and the interview guide that goes against each of those roles. Always ask yourself this question. Is this information really needed to judge an applicant's competence or qualifications for the job in question? Are all of the questions relevant in your interview guide to understand the value that they can bring to the company? So, does anyone have a story that they'd like to tell about an interview that they've gone through that was just, wow, I cannot believe that they asked me this question? Anyone? I have one for you. I was in college and I was being interviewed for an assistant position that was going to be part-time, right? Because I had class. And during the course of this interview, the gentleman that owned the firm that I was being interviewed for this position asked me if I thought for any reason that I would need to be out for a significant amount of time over the course of the next 12 months. Now, again, 20-year ago me was like, no, absolutely not. I'm totally fine. I mean, other than class, that's the only thing. It didn't click with me what he was really asking me. Anyone else have a question that they were asked in the course of an interview and their experience of interviews? We don't have to tell who the company is, just the question that was asked.
Well, I do have a question though. Maybe we can spend just a couple minutes and you can answer my question, but
Okay.
you've shared so much information about, working, being consistent and the questions and trying to, really, be consistent across all of the different candidates and stuff. How do you organize this to make it a fair selection? Do you have a rubric or, because we're often just swayed by perception. Sometimes I think when we're making a selection, don't you? Or what, am I thinking the right thing?
Well, I think that's the importance of remembering that we have to have a consistent interview guide for each position. That way, how we're viewing and measuring candidates against one another for the right fit is all fair, square, and legal.
Mhm.
Because if you're having a conversation with an individual, and let's say that you don't have that consistent process, you hire to what you like. There's no two ways about it. If you're having a great conversation with someone and you really feel like you connected, well, I just think they're a great candidate. Well, why? I don't know, but we had a great conversation. Okay. So do we know why they're going to be a good fit for the job that we have open? Or are we just going off gut here? And not saying that there isn't some considerations to be mindful of that emotion that we have, right? But it's a gut feeling. And I think we can all agree when we hire to that standard, sometimes it's not always the best fit long term. Angela asked the question, is it still appropriate to ask what their 3 to 5 year plan is? My question to you on that would be, is that relevant to the position? Is that relevant to your culture? So if you have a culture of innovation and constant change and growth opportunities, is that a value add? If this person says in 3 to 5 years, I would expect that I would be in a different position with more responsibility and a seat at the table. Is that relevant? Is that something that would add value to your organization? And absolutely ask the question. Just be sure that you're asking everyone. Let's see.
Yes. Like Manuel says, awesome information, Molly.
If they visibly get comfortable during the interview and use curse words, what's the best way to stop that? Okay, well, again, remember the pin trick, setting that down and just acknowledging that this is a professional interview and that we want to keep the responses in a professional managed way, and foul language isn't really something that we allow in this organization from a cultural perspective. Now, it could be a situation where they are it's just clear that they're not going to stop with the language, let's say, then you definitely want to make sure that it could be even be a situation where you address it right then and say, based upon the way that this interview is going, I don't believe that this is going to be a good cultural fit for you within our organization. And that's fair too. Of course, that opens you up to a different conversation with the candidate, especially if it makes them angry in the process. Did that answer your question, Angela?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right.
Well, that was great. Well, Molly, we're a little bit over our time. This was, you are such a spectacular speaker and some great information.
Yes.
So again, everyone, we'll share this with you later on today, a recording of this discussion today and with Molly. So Molly, thank you again.
Sure.
For coming. Hopefully you'll come back and share more.
Yes, I think we're scheduled next sometime in April. So I look forward to continuing to build on where we started today. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Molly. And thanks everybody for joining today. And we'll see you next Wednesday at the same time. So have a good Wednesday. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, David. Bye.